Hello, Deborah. This is
Hello,
Micah with
Micah.
Fluency Corp. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us on our first live expat chat.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and talk to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. And you are a special kind of expat because then you made it your business. So tell us your business name.
I did indeed. So I'm an expat coach. I'm also an intercultural psychologist, which is something that I think really adds to the coaching and to the activity. But yeah, I've been an expat for pretty much all my life,
Wow.
and I decided to create a business helping other people adjust and not go through what I went many times.
Yes. I remember when a business coach asked me one time, like, why do you wake up in the morning? I was like, I don't want anyone to feel as lost and sad as I did. Would you say that's similar?
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. People are like, oh, were you really that lost and sad? Yes, I was
Yeah,
really that lost and sad.
yeah. I like to say that all of my programs and services and everything that I put out there, the bottom line of it is what I wish I had
Yep.
and couldn't find. I don't know if it existed or not, but I couldn't find it when I needed it. I didn't even know it existed. So that's why in like everything I do is I put myself in that position. Like, what would I have need?
Yeah.
What would I would have needed when I was back then? And how can I help people get out of that situation? So that's the backdrop of what I do, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to the cultural. Did you say cultural psychologist? No, intercultural psychologist.
Intercultural, yeah.
Okay. How do you become an intercultural psychologist? I want this title as well. I want it to be the multilingual psychologist or something.
Well,
But
in linguistics, they probably have something similar.
yeah, right. So tell me, how do you become that? Yeah, what went into that?
So basically, I got a master's in intercultural psychology.
That is so cool. I didn't
It's
even know that there was a master's in that. That is amazing. And what were some of the classes?
So intercultural psychology is a subset of social psychology. Okay,
Mm.
so social psychology is where sociology, anthropology, and psychology overlap. So it's basically this social psychology is the psychology of groups, of social settings. Within that, there are many different sub areas, right? So
Mhm.
we talk about a lot of emotions and social psychology. There's a lot about how groups behave. There's a lot of studies, for example, why people react in sports events the way they do. Yeah, that's something that, like, regardless even of the culture of the country, the behavior of people in these events, social event, sports events, they're quite similar. If you look at, very popular sports. So intercultural psychology is a subset of social psychology. It's kind of like, well, to use a marketing term, it's a niche, but we don't use that in research. We don't use that term. It's a subset. So basically, what we study in intercultural psychology is how different groups from different cultures relate to one another and how that
Mm.
affects the person who is migrating, because a lot of that, it has to do with immigration and changing cultures by moving to another culture. So discrimination, integration, assimilation, all of these
Yeah.
terms are in the family of intercultural psychology. Some people study, for example, a lot of it is in the microaggressions, which is a subtype of discrimination. And I could go on, but I won't. So my area that I chose to study had to do with what in social psychology is called acculturation.
Mhm.
And it's different from what we think it is. Like the way we use the term is different the way we use it in social psychology. It's basically how people, the strategies they use to start living in another country. And there are many different strategies that we use. They're usually unconscious. We don't think about how we're going about living in a place, but we behave according to certain beliefs and so forth. And my thesis was
Mhm.
about international retired migrants. So I looked
Oh,
at
interesting.
people who were going through two transitions at the same time, moving countries, immigrating while leaving the workforce, and all that, those things that have an effect on our own identity, our purpose in the world. You know, what we bring to society has to do a lot with our work. So how these two transitions happen at the same time. So I won't bore you more with that
Well, I
theoretical
want
stuff.
to hear about your experience a little bit more. So I know that you're in Portugal right now. Can you tell me first how you got to Portugal? I might go back later because you said you've always been an expat. So first, yeah, tell me what led to you being in Portugal and how long have you been there?
Okay, so this is my second time in Portugal. The first
Oh, okay.
time the first time I lived here was from 2001 to 2005, and I had just finished my MBA. So I used to work in marketing. I used to work in corporations, nothing to do with this. And basically, having had prior experience being an expat, immigrant, foreigner, I don't care what you call it, some
Yeah.
place, um, I thought I had, you know, it was going to be easy breezy lemon squeezy, but it wasn't.
And why did you move in 2001?
Because I got a job here.
Oh, what were you doing? That's
I
so
was
hard to get a job in another country. Do tell us.
I was working. I had just finished my MBA in Spain, and I was working in the company doesn't exist anymore, in interactive television. So it was like
Okay.
the boom of the internet. Remember that, like 20 years
Of
ago, the
course.
internet was like, I remember.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was like thrilled to be in that new, you know, area of the new market and all that. But I was extremely unhappy, and I didn't know why I wasn't happy, and I didn't know how to make things right. It was a total mess. And I had this expectation that it would be easy because I had lived abroad before. I mean, I've lived in France, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Brazil. So, and when I tried for 5 years, I left. I said, I quit, I can't do this. And then I came back in 2013, about 10 years ago, almost to the date, to get married. And that's when I said, I can't just say, you know what, I didn't adjust again.
I know.
So I said, I have to take matters in my own hand. And it's interesting that I was like, okay, what do I do now to make this work? I had no idea. And I came across serendipity. I don't know.
Yeah.
As like I always wanted to learn to study psychology, but I didn't want to do clinical psychology, so I didn't know. And then I stumbled across this master's. It's called Psychology of Intercultural Relations. That's like the title of the
Yeah.
master's, and I did it. And I was like, wow, this blew my mind. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, now I understand what goes on. It was
Very cool.
really mind blowing. And I really liked the research, but I felt that itch to kind of like, okay, knowing is great, but how do you make that work? How do you help people get out
Apply
of the
it.
hole? How do you apply it? How do you bridge that gap? And having a business background, you know, my
Yes.
marketing blood started to
Mhm.
boil and say, okay, there's a business opportunity here. And then I started to do market research and see if there really was a market
Yeah. Can this work?
opportunity.
Hmm.
And it did. So that's what I've been doing ever since.
So, one of the things that you mentioned to us is preparing to move to a new place. What are some ways you can prepare? Because there's some ways you can prepare and then you later realize that was pointless.
Hmm.
and then there's some ways that you can prepare, and you don't know till you know, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell us so we don't do the wrong thing.
Well, the thing is, you will make mistakes. And one thing to prepare is to accept that. You will make mistakes. You will budget wrong. You will buy things that, what the hell is this? I don't know how to read the label, so it buy things wrong. So the first thing, one thing that I would suggest people is, typically what I find is that people focus a lot on the logistics, the visa applications and the rentals and school for the kids and all of the practical aspects. And while that is super important, the mindset and the emotional planning and the emotional robustness, I like to say that it's important to go to the emotional gym so you can lift the heavy weights of a move abroad.
Mm,
Knowing what to expect, what are the typical phases of adjustment? How do you create closure? Because it's important to create closure before you move. How do you decide what you're taking and what you're not taking? How do you create a home in your new place and make this bare four walls into a cozy place you want to be in?
yeah.
How do you make friends? How do you go about learning a new language? You have the methodology, but what is your goal with that language? What do you want to do with it?
Hmm.
How do you accommodate staying in touch with your family or friends back home? How do you
Yeah.
make that happen? So, and I like to do the how-tos because I like the very practical approach. It's mindset, but it's not fluffy. It's
Yeah.
very action-based. So I hope I gave you some ideas of how to prepare.
Yeah, it's things that people need to think about. So I don't know about you, but I I mean, time zone can really be a huge factor in creating distance from the people that you love, right?
Absolutely,
You keep
absolutely.
missing each other, or it's the
Yeah,
middle of the night
yeah,
when it's the
yeah,
best time to
yeah.
call.
So
And
yeah, absolutely. And not only that, yeah, Micah, but also what tends to happen if you don't plan ahead and you're not prepared for that is that for a while you keep in touch.
yeah.
But then you each of you get into your own routines. And then when you do talk, one person tends to talk a lot more than the other because whoever is moving has a lot of novelty to talk about, either
Oh, right.
on the good
There's
side,
everything
like,
to know.
this is
Yeah.
amazing, I love it, or on the negative side, oh, I miss you, I'm so
Yeah.
miserable. It's typically not in between. It's either one extreme or the other. And the person who is left behind, it's kind of the same old, same old. So the balance of the relationship sometimes gets shifted, and people start resenting one another for that. So it's really important to, when you are, first of all, have a plan, taking into account what you said about the time zones, have a schedule. And what I suggest in my program is to let whoever is staying behind
Yeah.
choose when, how,
Right.
and how, because they feel acknowledged.
Okay.
They feel part of the process. It's so easy for a friend who is going away, the friend who stays feels left behind sometimes. So it's important to include that person in the process and ask them, would you like to talk on Zoom, on WhatsApp, on FaceTime, email, texting? How do you want to keep in touch instead
Yeah.
of whoever is going calling the shots?
Okay, that's a great tip. Um, and so that's how we set up for success. Um, I would love to know from your personal experience or from how many conversations with you've had with so many expats, what are, the number one mistake either you made or the number one mistake people make in general? Either one. I love a good story. So if you can tell
Sure,
me a story, I'd love it.
sure. I'll give you my own example. So I think the number one mistake we make is not knowing what we're moving for. We typically know why we want to move. We have a lot of reasons why it makes sense and why it's good for us. But very rarely tap into the purpose of the move. And these are different things. So when I moved to Portugal the first time, um, I was very not aware of what I wanted to move for because I had left my MBA, I had finished it, I wanted to go up the corporate ladder. I had, all these ambitions to grow professionally. And I ended up in a country that is this big, that has, I don't know if zero, but very few headquarters from multinationals here. So I came to a place that was disaligned with what I wanted in life. So that is, and it has to do with the what for, is that when we move, I knew why I wanted to move. I wanted to move because I wanted to live in a European country, because I liked the project, but I didn't know what I wanted to move for. And that's the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
And when you do find that out, you can objectively look at your life goals. What are my life goals for the next X years? And see if that move makes sense within that context.
Yes. I'm trying to think like what was the goal of me when I moved to Mexico, and I hands down get fluent in Spanish. I think that was like why I moved. So for your last move to Portugal, did you have a goal for that one?
Well, yeah, for my last one, and I only knew kind of like after the fact because I moved without the knowledge that I have today.
Yeah.
But now I moved and I live here for the environment. I wanted to have a family, raise children in an environment that was that I felt was safe, that
Mm-hmm.
was wholesome, and my professional goals are completely different than they were before because we change. And that's actually another mistake that I made as well. And actually, I was just talking to a client yesterday about this, is that especially for us people who have moved around, we tend to think that, there's no problem. I've lived in this, and you start listing the countries that you've lived in. The thing is, we're not the same people.
Oh, I could not agree more. I mean, what I did at 26, I don't think I could do at 41 with a 2-year-old.
Exactly. So,
I couldn't even like,
I know our values are different, our priorities are
I'm
different,
tired.
our energy is different. Absolutely. Our energy
I'm like,
levels
I
are
couldn't
different.
do the new language again. And I can't
Yeah,
do that. Everything's different again.
absolutely. So that's something that I catch many people falling into that trap. And I say,
Yeah.
guys, we are like water. We behave differently according to the terrain. It can be a waterfall, it can be a lake. We are the same, but depending on where we are in life, we can be better off financially, worse off financially. We can be married and we were single before, or vice versa.
Yeah.
We could have 0 kids and now have kids, or vice versa. Or have grown kids and we're in an empty nest. There's so many different variations, and I see so many people falling into that trap of, oh, I've moved around before, so like I said, this is going to be easy peasy, lemon squeezy, and it wasn't. I
Yeah.
can tell you it wasn't.
Yeah. It's a random question, but I think I, I'm a little passionate about the opinions the world has about English speakers, Americans and Brits. So Richard's asking, are Anglo-Saxons more guilty than most in assimilating? Do we, British people and Americans, try to take our values with us? Are foreigners always foreigners, even in their own countries? So I
You have
want to
3 questions there.
I know. I want to take the first one mainly. Do you
Okay.
think Anglo-Saxons are more guilty than most in assimilating?
Okay. So, first of all, I would like to clarify the term assimilating. So, what we talk in everyday conversation as assimilating is what we see in intercultural psychology as integration. Okay, assimilation in intercultural psychology is when we almost stop considering. I don't want to get too theoretical here, but there are two forces when we move abroad. One is how attached and how much our identity is linked to our original culture, and how much we are attached and open to contact and participation in the host culture. Okay, these are the two drivers. And when we plot them on a matrix, you get four strategies, four acculturation strategies. Assimilation in that context is one of these strategies, whereby people don't want anything to do with their original culture, and they want to completely get immersed in the local culture. Okay, kind of like imagine an American couple living in Spain and at home speaking Spanish.
Yes, and
okay, that would be
birthdays the way the Spaniards do.
Exactly. I like exactly
when you eat, like
exactly
everything.
Exactly. Like Christmas gifts are not on the 24th or the 25th.
They're on the 6th.
They're on the 6th. Exactly. That would be like an example of assimilation.
Okay.
Right? Integration, I'm sorry to give us such a long answer to this question, but integration is when you have kind of a balance of both. Like you want to participate and have contact, but you also keep some of the things from your original culture. Now, I have to be honest, I have a problem with the word guilty.
I know, that's what this is my point. Yeah, I was actually going to say the same thing. No offense, Richard, but like, why is
I'd like to clarify that. What does he mean by guilty?
Okay, Richard, what do you mean by guilty? Like, as in, like, we want to still do the things that we've always done, even though we've moved.
Yeah. I'd like to understand that a little bit more in order to give an answer that, like, maybe addresses the issue the best way possible. So I'd like to understand what guilty means. And another thing is that I don't like stereotypification.
No.
I don't talk about the Spaniards are like this, the Anglo-Saxons are like that, the Americans are like that.
Yeah.
You know why? Because we are not our culture. We are our personality. We are our background. We are our family experiences.
Our family. Oh my gosh. Talk about the origins of our grandparents in the US or anywhere. Whoa.
Exactly. So I, in my programs, I don't use this kind of stereotypification because I think it's reductive. Like, I'm Brazilian.
Yeah.
And people look at me like, you don't look Brazilian. Like, Brazilians can be anything.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I avoid that. And what I use instead, I like, there is a concept, it's called cultural dimensions from Gert Hofstede. I probably butchered his name because he's Dutch, but it's something that I learned in the Master's in Intercultural Psychology. And I really like his approach, which has cultural dimensions. So there are 6 cultural dimensions, and you compare the dimensions within different countries instead of talking about X nationality is like this, Y nationality is like that. I think that's richer and brings more to the discussion and to clarification than anything else. Because what is Anglo-Saxon? What is American? I mean, American, it can be anything.
Yeah. Richard, are they on vacation there? Because I don't think they can do sun and beer and fish and chips every day as an expat.
Well, and even if they're retired.
And I was thinking about that too. So many people retire to places. Yeah. And there are huge expat communities in Mexico. There are huge expat communities for, retirement or for, I mean, most people want the sun, right? In the world.
But that gets old. The thing is, most times, and again, it depends on every person's strategy. So some people have an acculturation strategy that they want what is called separation. They want to be with the other expats. They don't want to learn the local language. They want to, still have dinner at 6 and all that stuff.
Yeah,
And
but
that's fine. And
and
that's okay as long as you're happy with that.
it absolutely is. So I would say, and again, Deb, you're the one, this is just me, talking off the top of my head, but I think people want to be comfortable always. They want to feel a part of a community, no matter who they are, where they come from, period. And this is why we have huge neighborhoods of Japanese in Dallas. Huge neighborhoods. Why do all of the Indians live in one neighborhood?
Yeah,
Why do
yeah.
all of the Vietnamese live in one neighborhood? So I think it's human nature, isn't it? To
Yeah,
collect.
there's that component of
Yeah,
human nature, but there's also a component about how the host society receives the immigrants. So if you look, for example, at in the literature, the author that is most prolific in work, and John Barry, who's the author of this model that I talked about with the 2 dimensions, he's Canadian. And Canada has typically had a very open immigration because they need
I was
people.
literally about to ask you about that because I've heard so much about Canada. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So it also depends. So acculturation is a two-way street. It's not only about people who go to a place, but also how people are received in that place. And if you go to a place and you want to integrate, but people don't let you, you can't.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't like
So yeah, so
beat down their
imagine
door to,
exactly.
yeah.
So I'm going to take another example. If you go to a place where you don't speak the language, and for whatever reason you can't learn, or it's harder for you to learn, and you
Yeah.
end up speaking your original language,
Yeah.
and that host society doesn't like you for that because they believe that you have to learn the language, they will create this barrier. So it's a two-way street. It's not just what
Mm,
we want as immigrants or as
yeah.
expats, it's
Yeah.
how we are received too. And
Absolutely.
it depends. It depends on historical ties. It depends on your personality.
Personality.
It depends
It's
on
huge on
government
personality.
policies.
Yep. Some
So
some people have to learn a certain level.
yeah, so it
Yeah.
depends on what you're doing there. If you're going for work, you probably have to learn the language like better than other people who are going for retirement. So
Hmm.
there's so many variables in that
Interesting.
equation. It's hard to pinpoint what works best. And what I always say is that there's really no clear-cut answer of what is the right thing to do or the
No,
wrong thing to do.
no.
It's what makes
What
sense
works
for
for you?
you now.
Yep.
Because what makes sense for you today might not be the same that makes sense for you tomorrow. Because I
I
can tell
agree.
you, many of my clients move to Portugal, for example, and they speak English, they're American or whatever, they're English speaking, doesn't matter. And they say, yes, I want to integrate, I want to learn the language, da da da, all good. But then they tell me, oh yeah, but I want to find a hairdresser that speaks English. I want to find a pediatrician for my child that speaks English. I want to find a dentist that speaks English. I want to, and and it's like, well, which is it? And I do that just to challenge their thinking because there's no right or wrong way.
Yeah.
For some things, like talking to a doctor, you want to know what they're telling you and you want
It
them
was
to understand what you're saying.
it was very scary. I got very sick in Mexico and I did not understand everything that was going on. I don't recommend it.
There
I
you
don't
go.
recommend it. I got typhoid and I did
Oh
not
my
know
gosh.
what was going on
Yeah.
100%. And I needed a lawyer at some point because I got robbed. I
Oh
don't
my
know how to
God.
speak lawyer speak
Yeah.
in English
Let
barely,
alone in Spanish, of
let
course.
alone informal legalese Spanish.
Wow.
I just let it go because
Yeah.
I felt
Yeah.
so helpless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
I understand. And I'm, everyone's like, oh, you're always going to say learn the language. No, I'm not going to say always learn the language because it's different for different people of what they need to do in that country.
Yeah. I mean, I think the basics you kind of have to know, even if you're a tourist going
It makes
someplace.
your life. I know.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I'm taking Portuguese.
Oh, yay.
Yes, I just started because I'm going to be, oh my gosh, I totally forgot. I don't think we're going to have time, but I'm going to be there in June.
Oh, you have to let me know when.
I know. We've got to like either just take a walk with, I've got like 3 kids coming with me, like the whole shebang with the family. But yes. When
Yes, let me
we're in
know.
Lisbon for 3 days, we have to just like be like, meet me at this coffee shop.
Yeah, I can give you tips with kids and all that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. So I know we got off, but yes, I to the point, I am trying to learn directions,
Yeah,
asking questions. Like I went to Germany for a conference about 4 years ago. I was so pissed off that I had no German. Like
I know.
I had never traveled before with nothing.
Yeah, I felt that way in Germany too. I remember for 2 days straight, I had
Frustrating.
tomato soup because that was the only thing I understood on the
Oh
menu
my
is
God,
tomaten soup.
yes. No, absolutely. And everyone's like, oh, everyone in German speaks English.
No,
Germany.
not
No,
true.
they don't.
No, not true. I mean, the
It's not true.
younger people might, but older people, no. And I remember when
The
I lived
taxi
in,
drivers didn't. It was
yeah,
real rough. I mean, I had to show the address and hope I was getting there.
I know. I lived in France for a while, and then I went back, and after I learned French, when I
Yes.
started to learn Spanish, my brain just melted. It got all mixed up.
Yes.
So
Mine
I
is
had
going to do
to,
that with Portuguese for sure.
yeah, you are going to speak Portuñol, like we say,
Yes.
but
And I
that's
speak
fine.
French. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah, it's a mesh. It's a mesh. But what I did was because I had my MBA was partly in Spanish, I had to function in Spanish. I mean, I couldn't
Exactly. I was
speak
going to ask you
broken
about that.
Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I did was I compartmentalized and my French just went out the window. So
Right.
I remember when I went to France last time, and I know the French really value you trying to speak French. I remember my glasses broke and I went to this optician and I was like, s'il vous plaît, mes lunettes sont cassées.
Yes.
Est-ce que vous pouvez parler anglais, s'il vous plaît? And then after they saw that I was making the effort, they were like, okay, let's speak English. But I had to dig up the words. I don't know from where,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but I think when we're going as a tourist or even it's polite to
Yes.
say basic words and
Yeah.
that. But being polite and being fluent are like there's a huge distance from that.
Absolutely. Yes. My goal is to take 50 hours before I leave in June. It's going to be super basic.
Yeah,
I know the Spanish is going to be helpful.
yeah,
Obviously, I've had a Portuguese teacher tell me before, like, I can probably get you to a nice basic level of fluency in about 2 years, with a couple of hours a
yeah.
week. You can manage, right? Not good, but you could
Yeah.
manage.
Well,
So
it depends on what you want it for. Like
yeah,
what
just
do you
chit
want?
chat. Yeah,
Yeah,
just chit
then
chat.
that's okay. Then that's okay.
Exactly. So Richard is asking if education plays a part, but I don't know in what. In assimilating, maybe? Because that was
Or
what
what
his
type of
topic was.
education? Like
I
formal
know.
education? Well, I think that what plays a part in a lot is not so much. I'm assuming this is just to keep the answer coming until we get clarification. I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's formal education. Now,
Yes.
I think that it's more about open mindedness than education because some
Yes.
people are very well educated, but so set on their ways that they don't open up. And again,
They miss a lot.
there is no judgment. You can stay closed. And if you're happy like that,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
There's no expectation that you have to assimilate or you have to integrate. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you do it from a place of consciousness and you're happy with what you're doing. If there's a dissonance, and a dissonance is when your behavior doesn't match your values or what you believe, then that's going to be icky. You're not going to like the experience because it's kind of like when you know smoking is bad for you, but you smoke anyway, you feel icky about it.
Mhm.
You're doing something that you know is not good for you and for others. But so if so, it doesn't. matter really, what matters is knowing how you want to go about your experience and doing and making steps to do that in a conscious way. That's why preparation is so important,
Yes.
because you think about it before you jump with 2 feet in the pool.
Yes, absolutely. I want to see Alice. This is actually a Fluency Corp teacher who used to work with
Oh,
us, and then
cool.
she started her own business. So she says, as a Mexican immigrant starting a business in Texas, it's been a challenge, not only because of the language, but of the business protocols and culture. And Deb, you started your business in another country. And at the same time, it's been very enriching when we start building relationships and contributing to Americans or other immigrants' projects. That's interesting. I'm sure you have
Absolutely. Yeah.
quite the community there.
And one thing, building on what Alice is saying, is really understanding intercultural communication when we're interacting with different cultures. Like, how do people communicate? So, some cultures are more high context, meaning um, you can't get straight to the point. You
Ah,
know,
yes.
you need you
The
need
chit chat
the
first.
chit chat. Other
Yeah.
cultures are exactly the opposite. If you start with the chit chat, you lose their attention. So it's the first thing is actually to know how you communicate, because it can be related to your culture, but it also can be related to your personality. I mean, you can be American and come. I had a client. I'm thinking of a client saying this. She was born in the States, lived in New York, but her family was from the Caribbean. So it was like she was outgoing. She had a more Latin way of doing things than you would expect from a New Yorker. So her style of communication was not didn't fit in the box of what you'd expect in New York. So it's first knowing how you communicate, and that helps a lot, because then okay, other people communicate differently. How do I make the communication the most effective? Speaking the same contextual language, so to speak, and not only the language, but the subtext of it.
So Richard clarified,
Okay.
thinking that some areas, because I mentioned that, and I think this is the same for most cities. That's why we have Chinatown. This is why we
Yeah.
have Little Italy. This is why we have, you know, these neighborhoods with a larger concentration of a group from a certain country. And so when I mentioned that, he said, are some nationalities there to work in factories, but maybe the same nationalities are relocating for office work? They might integrate. So, what do you think, Deb, between someone coming and moving and working in a factory versus, and I have my opinion on this language wise. I'm gonna ask you first. Whereas
Okay.
someone going to work at Toyota headquarters, which is
Yeah.
here in Texas, integrating more.
Okay,
Opinion.
that's a good question. I think, and sorry to be cliche, it depends.
Of
Now,
course, right?
typically, and I'm going to use an example from a study that was done in the Anthropology magazine from the University of Algarve. So they studied, and that maybe address this issue. So they studied two populations in Algarve, which is the south of Portugal.
Oh, I'm going there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, sorry.
And there was a population of UK immigrants, so people from the UK, and another group of immigrants from the Ukraine. This was many years ago,
Before the war.
before this whole mess.
Yep.
So, and then they saw how fluent people were in the local language, being Portuguese, after 10 years, or they did a longitudinal. So it was like after
Interesting.
a period of time, then another period of time, another period of time. And the Ukrainians spoke on average better level of Portuguese than the British in an equivalent time frame.
Yes.
And the explanation that they had was social economical, because on average, the Ukrainians in this study had a lower socioeconomic status, lower socioeconomic situation. So they had to learn the language to survive.
Interesting.
And the other group, on average, didn't have that need. They either were remote workers or were retired or didn't need to interact in Portuguese. Now, that said, that was the study. Now, that said, there's also, as I mentioned, the factor of the host society. Now, you go to restaurants in touristy places, you will see English and menus in English. You won't see them in Ukrainian.
This is what I was going to ask next. I was going to do the language. Like,
Yeah.
it's
So,
the business language of the world. It's the tourist language of the world.
So, and that has to do with a lot of things that I don't think are pertinent to our conversation.
A lot of things. Exactly.
But so it has to do with, do you need the language to survive? Do you need to integrate to survive? Then yes, you probably are going to do that.
Yep.
Do you, and like in the headquarters of Toyota, using your example, will people be able to speak in English, or in, like in your example, because it's in Texas? Probably.
Mm-hmm.
So, and will people with a better level of education, maybe that was what he was talking about, what Richard was talking about, is like maybe people on a higher level of more qualified workforce will have access to more languages, therefore they can experience that. I don't know if I'm addressing the question correctly, but that might be where they're coming from.
And I'll throw in my 2 cents. And again, I don't have large studies, right? We have to take a lot of these things with a grain of salt and anecdotal, because I'm not quoting studies. To Deb's point about the English speakers, I think this is why I often defend English speakers, is it's often very hard to avoid English. It can be. There isn't quite as, you got to figure out what's on this menu, or you don't know what you're going to get to eat because there's an English menu. You know, when I was in Japan, everyone wanted to speak to me in English, and I had to make the conscious decision of saying I was from Mexico, and then I had to speak Japanese because no one knew Spanish.
Got it.
That's how I had to push myself. But it's hard to do that, right?
Yeah,
to make yourself be completely confused.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's hard, and it can be tricky because you can't understand something and then just by reflex answer it in English, and they're like, oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. I remember one guy, I said to him, you know, like, I want to hear all of those instructions in Japanese. And of course he said them, and I was like, I don't know what he said. But I pretended, you know, I was like, I'm not speaking English. But
yeah.
So what I have found, again, just my little microcosm of students that I've worked with, which is going to be, you know, possibly biased in the first place. And I remember working in Boston, and there's a huge Brazilian community in Boston.
Yeah.
And so many of the people had absolutely amazing levels of English because they're working in the kitchen, and then the waiters are all English speakers. So they're daily getting more and more fluent. Yeah. And their English was incredible after about a year because they had to, right? They had to communicate with the front of the house. And so to Richard's question about factories and things like that, it's just exposure, right?
Yeah. I would say that it depends. It's exposure. And I think
exposure,
your point is like, does your life depend on that?
Yeah.
If it does, then you will do it.
And to his question about education, I cannot tell you how many people we work with at Toyota that don't speak as well as the people who speak in the back of that kitchen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there's the Japanese portion at Toyota, and they all work together all day.
Yeah. And it depends also on how exposed they were to other languages as a child or as a young adult, how much they like languages. Some people don't like to learn languages, and that's okay. Not everyone. You know, I didn't like to study physics at school. I still don't, but like, it's great that there are people who do like to do.
Thank God.
So we all have our thing.
And
that's fine.
Absolutely. Okay, let me look at my next. I'm looking at my next little list of questions. I'm putting us on a totally different path now. Okay, what are the differences between countries and or nationalities that you've seen? I love these questions.
Okay, countries and nationalities. Again, I find it hard to answer these questions without being like very.
We can do another one if you want.
Uh, no, that's okay. Because I do get these questions, and what I tend to see is that, and what in what context is the differences? Let me just clarify that so I can give a more assertive answer.
Ready.
In terms of integrating, or in terms of
Sorry, say that again.
in what context are these differences? Like in terms
Oh, it's
of
just from the list of questions.
okay,
It just
okay,
it was some of the ones that we had written together
okay, okay,
beforehand. I
okay.
can skip it.
No, that's okay. So basically, what I see as kind of like differences is in terms of nationalities is that people who um, speak the language or think they speak the local language tend to minimize the challenges of moving to this country. And I'll give it a specific example.
Okay, yeah.
So, for example, if you're Brazilian and you're moving to Portugal because Brazil speaks Portuguese and Portugal speaks Portuguese,
Got it.
you tend to minimize the challenges of the move. And what people forget
Yeah.
is that if you're Brazilian, you don't speak European Portuguese.
Yeah.
You do, it's the same language, but it's kind of like putting someone from the Midwest in the Highlands of Scotland. It's
That's
the
a
same thing.
that's a really good point. I tried to explain to somebody yesterday. They were saying, "Oh, there's so many phrases I don't know." She was from Mexico, now working in the United States, and I said, "I moved from Oklahoma City to Boston, and there were so many phrases I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know."
It's,
I
I
said, "There's
mean,
gonna be phrases you don't know."
yeah, and it's not only phrases in this particular case about the Portuguese from other
Oh,
Portuguese
sure,
speaking
exactly.
countries.
This is
Yeah, it's like the accents and the intonation and the
yeah,
cadence
yeah.
and
The
so
humor,
the
the
humor. So humor is so dangerous.
humor is
Humor
very,
is so dangerous because
yeah,
you
yeah,
can easily offend someone without even knowing what you're doing.
yeah,
So, so
yeah,
that would be, I would say that nationalities more about like similarity of languages.
yeah.
They tend to minimize or to underestimate the challenges of adjustment in a new country.
Okay, for all the people listening, watching, exercising and listening wherever you are, if you guys have questions, we're on our countdown here. This is the moment to ask Deb anything that you would like. I'm going to keep going with a couple of things. So Deb, in my language business, I'm often talking to the RMCs and the DSPs and saying, please check in with your clients 3 months and 6 months down the road. Don't move them, find the kids a school, check in
Yeah,
2 weeks later and say peace out. They are going to need more, most likely. Check in
absolutely.
again. It's not a lot of time, right? To check in. So to that point, because that's kind of when I fell apart in Mexico, was about the 4 to 6 month mark of my living there. So what do you hear from people after the move? Like, holy, I didn't
Hmm.
know
Yeah,
it would be this bad
got
or
it.
hard.
Got it. Well, to your point, there is a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and there's an article in HR Review magazine that
Ooh,
states at up to 40% of international assignments within corporations fail. And what they consider failure is the person had, let's say they have an assignment for 5 years, they go back before the time of the assignment ends, up to 40%. And in the report, they say that the average cost per employee that fails is around $300,000.
I was going to say 250.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a big deal. So the thing is that you got to check in, and what mostly happens is either in a corporate context, either the person is underestimates the challenges with dealing with different cultures in terms of communication, in terms of even food. It takes a while for us to adjust.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The other thing is that sometimes there are certain things we perceive in a culture, certain values that we perceive in a culture that are not aligned with our personal values. I'm going to give an example. Like, let's say that we come from a place that is very ethical and objective and assertive, and we go to a country where the decision-making process is at the water cooler, which is a little bit more laid back and that.
Yeah.
Or, deals are done and everything is discussed and decided during a 3-hour lunch with the buddies. It can be hard in a corporate setting. So it's dealing with these aspects. That's one thing in a corporate setting. With the families, it's not preparing properly. Many times, partners that move with the spouse to a new country, they're leaving a career behind. They're leaving a support system behind. They're typically wives. Unfortunately, I wish there were more husbands or males in the opposite position.
Accompanying.
It's typically wives. They sometimes go from a place where they're making their own money to having to ask their husband or their partner for money for everyday stuff. That takes a toll on your self-esteem.
Yeah.
And your self-worth. So it's understanding, it's preparing for that to happen. And when you realize and you didn't prepare properly or you didn't prepare enough, and the proverbial X hits the fan, and then the relationship is, it takes a while for the kids to adjust. It takes a while for the kids to make friends. It takes a while for everyone to start getting their ground, finding their ground. And for those who are not in in a corporate setting, typically what happens is they either lost sight or they never saw what they were moving for, kind of like what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, or what they were moving for, they weren't able to adjust and it didn't pan out in reality.
Yeah.
So I would say that these are the main aspects. That's why, it's important not only to give the corporate cultural training, which is this nationality is typically late. This nationality, when you get like an age in certain countries, you don't hand people money. You put it on the table. It's unpolite to give someone money to their, like, these customs. They're super important. But what cultural training doesn't do is help people understand how to navigate their emotional side and their behaviors within these new rules.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I can't stress enough. If you want someone and those 40% don't even account for the fact that people who don't fail but stay on and they're miserable and unproductive.
I know.
So the whole is a bit larger than that, I'm sure.
And I heard from a company the other day, that's not even taking account, and I will quote the HR director, the relocation failed, and then the employee came back and poisoned the well. Ouch.
Yep.
So that's not even taking into account the effect of they left me out there to drown.
Yeah.
And coming back and telling everyone that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. And then, of course, right, the lack of the person in the position abroad now, suddenly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the team and that productivity.
Yeah. It's a ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a huge ripple effect. And Yes, I think people think oftentimes with culture and language, like, oh, these are soft skills. We can put numbers on it, people.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
We just have.
We just have. And we could probably get it up to like 400K with all the
Yeah. Listen,
extra.
you can only manage what you measure.
Yes,
When you
exactly.
measure these things, you can manage them. But if you
Yes.
don't bother to measure them, you'll
Yes.
just go like flying blind. It's like, oh, the
Yeah.
wind is
And
this way,
throwing
the wind
money
is
at,
that way.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Let's do the same thing as the last relo and hope
Yeah.
we get a different
Yeah.
a
Absolutely.
different result.
And even like it goes even choosing the person, the right person, not only for their
Yes, choose
technical
your people
skills.
before you choose them.
Yeah, it's like not only for their technical skills, but or their managerial skills, but for their cultural competence skills. Because you can
Absolutely.
assess that.
Yes.
There are assessments for
That's
that.
what I have said too. I said to the company with the poisoning of the well, I said, please talk with us when you're choosing who you will be sending next time. And let's make sure we're sending
The right person.
the right person who will thrive
Yeah,
in this challenging
exactly.
environment of new, different, someone that is
Yeah.
malleable and flexible and not.
Yeah, you need emotional intelligence.
Yes.
You need to self awareness.
Awareness.
It's not only about it's honestly nowadays and to the future, it doesn't really, the technical stuff matters less and less.
Yeah.
It's more about how you interact. Like if you're in team with people of different cultures and different habits and different communication styles, how do you communicate in a way that one, you don't offend, you get things done, two, that you understand the verbal and nonverbal cues that you're getting back. You have to have your eyes open, your antennas up, and your ears, all that. That has to do with emotional intelligence, with cultural intelligence, which is another type of intelligence,
Yes.
um, cultural competence, uh, and call them soft, I don't care, but they're crucial and more so by the minute.
Someone asked, I think it was just 3 days ago, they said, we have a leader that no one likes working with, and we want to do coaching for this person, but we know that this person doesn't want to do it. How can you change this person? I said,
You can't.
I can't. And I said it, they were like, oh, and I said, and if any other company tells you that they can make this person want to change,
Yeah,
they're
have you
just trying to
never
get
heard you
money. I'm
can
going to
take
tell
the
you, this
whole?
person has to want this coaching.
Of course, of course. That's
Thank you, Deb.
in coaching. We have a term that is called that we say that some people are not coachable. Either they're not at that moment for whatever reason,
Exactly.
or
Wrong
they're
timing
not
or
in more permanent ways.
yes, yes.
Like,
They're not open to it. Yeah.
yeah, because they're just not open to feedback. They're not open to looking
Yeah.
inwards, to asking questions to themselves. So
Yeah.
yeah, haven't they ever heard about the say like you can take the horse to the water, but you can't make him drink?
Yes, it was sad, but I one of our values is super transparency, and I was like, oh yeah, we can't help you
You
with that.
can't. You can't. And I can tell you, if I'm on a call, I'm on a strategy call with a prospective client, and I spot that, I don't take that person.
Oh, I was like, we are
I
not able to
don't. I
help
don't
you
take
with.
them on because I can't deliver if so I won't.
No, I agree. Okay, so we have a minute left. I have a question that I always ask everybody. So so when you moved to Spain, from 1 to 10, how hard or great was that first year? So 1 is, oh my gosh, I just got bulldozed. 10 was, it was easy peasy lemon squeezy. So how was that
It
first
was
year?
about a 1.
And what was the number one reason for that? Or can you just quickly say like
when I moved to Spain, I was also moving to do my MBA.
Yeah.
So that was intense. That
Yeah.
was a lot of work.
Yeah.
That was a huge investment money-wise. Like, what
Yeah.
the hell am I doing here? That was like moving from living on your own to sharing an apartment with 2 other people.
Oh, wow. How old were you
Eventually,
for that one?
I was 28.
Okay, you were 28, not married, right? Because you
Not
were sharing
married, single.
place.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was single.
And then I'm going to go quick because we have 30 seconds. And then moving to Portugal, married, kids yet?
Yes.
Okay, so married, kids, moving to Portugal, 1 to 10. How hard was that one the first year?
The first year was 5, 4 or 5. 4 or
And
5.
then the second year?
The second year, adjustment cultural-wise was a lot better. There was other adjustments like, motherhood and all that. Because everything,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. One thing we forget, I know we're a bit over, is that our lives are amalgamation of practical and existential. They coexist.
Yeah. Oh, I know it right now. Yeah.
So
The first
it's
couple
hard
of
to
years
separate one
after,
from the other.
No, exactly. I mean, work is work. That is that. But
Yeah.
everything that comes with having had a child, needing a partner.
I know. That's why when people say
totally
work-life balance, it's like, that's a non-issue because work is part of your life. It's life balance.
Yeah, I like it. That's going to be our quote, the life balance. Yeah. Deb, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I hope
everybody.
this was helpful to people watching.
Exactly. We're going to be doing a lot of expat chats. We hope to get a real variety of people: South Africa, Canada, Australia, Japan. We really want, no matter if your first language is English, second language, I probably am not going to do things in Spanish and French, but English will be the language here. If you have someone or know someone that would be great for our expat chat, please contact us. And then either tomorrow or Thursday, we do have our HR leadership show that we're going to be doing as well. And so tomorrow we have Robert Cormier with Paramount Transportations. And then I believe Thursday is Josh Cutler in HR. So I look forward to talking with them. And it's going to be 11 o'clock Central, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So we'll see you guys there.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Micah. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.